Yonda pravishya mama vachamimam prasuptam sanjeevayadi akila shakti dharaswadhamna anyamscha hastacharana sravanatvagadini pranan namo bhagavate purushaya vibhi om stavakaya dharmasya sarvadharmasya gopini avatara varishthaye ramakrishnaya te namaha. It's always a great joy to come to this center. Frequently, when I talk about the development of Vedanta movement in the US, I frequently talk about the role played by some of the senior American nuns who have done so much to spread Vedanta among Americans and among in different parts of this country. So it's a great joy to come back here and to share with you some of the ideas in my mind. The topic is very intriguing, the survival kit for a spiritual journey. So what do we have normally in a survival kit? In a box, in a bag in which you keep bandages, neosporin, things that you may require in a condition of emergency. We may keep certain things in our life, also certain things that we may need in course of time. Because life can never be a continuous succession of success stories, happiness and joy. Sometimes there are difficult terrains we have to travel through, difficult places to go through, and frequently there is a conflict in our own mind which every sincere spiritual seeker will face. A strong desire to do something for spiritual life. For example, you may listen to a lecture, read a book, you may go somewhere, and you may get this idea, well, tomorrow onwards I shall try to meditate, or shall try to japa. And even some of you may have taken initiation from different Swamis or order outside. When you try to meditate, when you try to do japa, suddenly the mind is not willing to cooperate with you. You have a strong desire, sincere desire. It's not lack of desire, strong desire, a lot of interest. You're ready to do whatever it takes for you to begin your spiritual journey, and you have a strong conviction. But the mind is not willing to cooperate. We often feel tomorrow onwards, every day morning, I shall meditate, 7 o'clock. Or even not just for meditation, even for going for a walk in the early morning, you may take a decision which doctor has told you. But when 7 o'clock comes, you would rather say, or rather, I shall rather begin tomorrow. So this kind of procrastination, as they call it in psychology, irrational, totally unjustified tendency to not do what we ought to do. And frequently, unfortunately, very often, it could also be a tendency to do what we ought not to do. So this conflict between mind and intellect, between what we want to do and what our mind allows us to do, permits us to do. We can just imagine if we can always get the permission of our mind to do whatever we want to do, there'll be no problem in this world. Absolutely no problem. Most of us want to live spiritual life, and most of us don't want to do anything that's not really good for us or good for others. But then mind is not willing to cooperate. In the Mahabharata, the villain of Mahabharata is Duryodhana. Janami dharmam nachami pravritti, janami adharmam nachami nivritti. He's a great villain of Mahabharata. Duryodhana. He says, I know what is dharma, but I can't bring my mind to do it, to practice it. And I know what is not dharma, I cannot stop my mind from doing it. A kind of dilemma. I don't think there is any spiritual seeker anywhere in the world who has not gone through this dilemma. The conflict between what we want to do sincerely and what our mind eventually permits us to do. It's a great conflict. So how to bridge this gap? How to solve this problem? For that, we have to know our mind. And of course, there are different ways of understanding the mind. And when you read the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali Sutras, the Vyasa Bhashya, then Vyasa Bhashi Vivarana by Shankaracharya, then Yoga Bhashi Vartiga. Many books are there, Bhojavruti and so on. In fact, I had to do a series of talks, 144 lectures for the Stanford archives, at the request of some of the professors and academics and devotees who wanted me to put in the archive the bhashyas, the commentaries on Yoga Sutras. So when you go to the Yoga Sutras, you will understand that human mind is not exactly what Freud, Jung, or Adler talked about. Human mind is actually much more complex and much more difficult to understand. There are certain forces in our mind. We call tendencies, vasanas, vrittis, samskaras, sankalpas. All these are the byproducts of what we do, what we think, what we imagine. When we do something, it produces two types of result. One kind of result which is very tangible. You help a person, a homeless man is requesting you for a help, and you do it, he's helped. And he, of course, gets a result. And you also get a result. Not just losing money, but by doing something noble, something good, you generate spiritual energy, spiritual asset in your mind. Spiritual vrittis, vasanas, and samskaras. So there is one interesting principle that is in yoga psychology. The first sutra of Sadhanapada, Tapaswadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhananani Kriya Yoga. Austerity, feeding our mind with good spiritual food, that is Swadhyaya, reading good things, associating with great ideas, that we give good food to the mind. So our body falls sick if you eat poisonous, toxic food, and we die. Mind also falls in a much more intense and painful manner if we feed our mind with toxic food. And then Patanjali says, Kriya Yoga, one important element emphasized by the commentators, not Patanjali himself, by Vajaspati and Vijnana Bhikshu, two commentators. But it says, Karma Yoga is the first stepping stone to spiritual life. Karma Yoga has got different aspects, but one central principle is our actions constitute the building blocks of our life and destiny. To give you an example, if you continuously do things, keep doing good things, thinking good thoughts, speaking good words, and associating with good people, through all these, by all these, you are generating spiritual wealth in your mind. You are feeding your mind with spiritual food. If you feed your dog with thorns and stones, it may bite you. If we feed our mind with toxic food, it also begins to bite you, becomes anxious to anxiety neurosis, depression, different kinds of hallucinations. All this happen when we torture our mind, when we do injustice to our mind, when we feed our mind with junk food or toxic food. Very recently, I get a number of emails every week. And the most recent email that came from a gentleman who listened to a video in the social media explosion we talk about. And there, the speaker taught him, you meditate on I am that. I am that within quotation mark. He meditated 2 years ago, he started meditating. And right now he's a patient. He tried MRI, he tried different medical facilities to get rid of his headache, but he could not get out. He's still a patient. So this is one way of torturing the mind, pranayama, all the advanced yogic practices without getting established in yamas and niyamas. That's one. Another point is always trying to feed our mind with ideas that may not always be helpful, that could be poisonous. So that will generate negative assets in the mind. This is a good action, not only physical action. Even good words you speak, meditation, listening to prayers, listening to some great ideas. All these are different ways of feeding our mind with nutritious, healthy food. And similarly, toxic food also can create its impact. Positive food, healthy food, makes our mind our friend, our benefactor. It helps us. How do we judge whether our mind is friendly or not? Suppose you try to do something good and your mind congratulates you, cooperates with you, encourages you. That mind is your friend. But drug addict, very often people suffer from this problem. They want to get out of this terrible slavery, mental, intellectual, psychological slavery, but they cannot. So what happens is, in spite of our best efforts, we are not always able to do what we want to do. Such a mind is unfriendly mind, hostile. According to our ancient Ayurvedic science, Charaka Samhita says, Prasanna Atma Indriya Manaha Susthaha iti abhidhiyati. To get a good survival kit for your spiritual life, you need a good friendly mind, a mind that is friendly towards ourselves, a mind that helps us in what we do when we try to do something good, a mind that warns us, prevents us from doing something that may eventually be bad for us. So in the scriptures, there are some interesting principles. One simple principle is often mentioned. It is linked to Bhagavata Purana, Kayena Maja Manasindreva, Buddhyatmana Vanusada Subhava, Karomi Yedhi Sagalam Parasmai Narayana Yedi Samapayami. It could be Karodi, it may be then Samapayetad. There are two different versions, different subject. You can ask during interaction if you are interested. What it means is, whatever we do with our mind, with our word, with our thought, emotions, and feelings, all should be given a spiritual orientation. Even the secular can be spiritualized. Even the secular activities can be done in a spiritual manner. Then that will help us to turn our mind friendly towards ourselves. Why? We are giving good food to our mind. Now, when you give good food to your mind, when your mind becomes your best friend, which helps you, encourages you when you try to do something good, then that mind is the best friend, and that's the best survival kit in spiritual life. Now, very often, it's not easy. So one way to understand is we must slowly try to remember one phenomenon that happens when you practice, when you begin spiritual life. There's a conflict between our old habits, old tendencies, old vrittis, old samskaras, old sankalpas, vasanas, and so on. Tendencies, impressions, aptitudes, and attitudes. Accumulated samskaras coming from maybe innumerable previous life cycles. They may be good or bad. It's like a mixed bag. Mind is compared either to a mixed bag or to a lake in traditional commentaries. A lake may have a lot of pure water, but on the surface there may be weeds and grass and so on. Or maybe mud below and then pure water below. A bag can have both good and bad samskaras and vrittis. In other words, mind is like a lake with multi-layers, different layers, and it also is like a mixed bag. So when we try to practice spiritual life, what happens is frequently some unexpected filth and dirt may emerge from the bottom layers of the lake and come to the surface. You can try yourself. Tomorrow you try to meditate. A new kind of, tomorrow you intensify your spiritual practice. If anyone tries to practice meditation without first going through some of the preliminary disciplines, like for example, you should elevate your mind to a higher level by reading scriptures, by listening to good things, reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, if devotees are concerned, or whatever tradition you belong to. If you believe in, if you're a Christian, you may read Sermon on the Mount is one way of reading, one way of preparing the mind for meditation, according to your tradition, whatever it may be. Meditation should be done slowly and after elevating our mind to a higher level. Otherwise, you can create triple delusions, delusions of grandeur, persecution, or maybe reference, as you call. So what happens is, when we try to meditate, our mind is suddenly trying to run away from the seat where we are sitting. If you switch on the TV, mind is very happy. When you try to meditate, conflicts, problems, mind gets restless, it gets disturbed. But if you come out to the shrine and switch on the TV or read some of the popular things, which actually may not be good for spiritual life, mind is calm and quiet. What it means is, mind is connecting with what we don't really need, because our mind has a lot of unhealthy samskaras. They are dominating the mental system. And healthy samskaras are subservient to the dominating negative samskaras. So one way to do that, to change this structure, this situation is to increase the quantity of positive samskaras, to increase the quantity of healthy tendencies. So if you continuously practice spiritual disciplines, we'll be generating a huge quantity of healthy tendencies, samskaras, and impressions, and they will help us to slowly enjoy spiritual disciplines, and also turn our mind more and more friendly and less hostile. So this is an important principle frequently kept in mind. So according to Yoga Sutra, this explained karma, vritti, samskara, sankalpa, vasana, chakram. It is like a wheel. Whatever we do becomes a tendency, an impression, a samskara, a strong attitude, and that again help the influence our actions in future. So if we continuously do good things, we may be doing mechanically, you'll find that you are unconsciously generating a lot of healthy samskaras and vasanas. And this is a slow process. Meditation is a quick process, but meditation is difficult. But karma yoga, any kind of noble activity, any kind of unselfish activity will generate healthy samskaras, and mind becomes more and more friendly towards ourselves. In this process, there is one principle. All of us believe in God. So where do we place our faith in this process? What's the role of faith, and what's the role of our own effort in this process? Actually, what happens, without our own effort, we can never make spiritual progress. In Ramanuja system, there is, which we are going to discuss in course of time, self-surrender, prapatti sharanagati, anu villisa sankalpaka, pradi villisa vardhanam, rakshasiri vishwasa goptutva varnam tatha, atma nikshebaka arpaneshad vitha sharanagati. Ramanuja, wonderful book, that is Sharanagati Gadyam. There he elaborates the entire psychological process of self-surrender. That is a wonderful thing. Surrender, self-surrender is like hot line. But even before surrendering, we should have exhausted our own resources, our own efforts. Our efforts prepare our mind to make use of God's grace. If God's grace comes all of us, very often you find, and our mind is not ready, we may interpret God's grace as luck or accident. You have heard of the well-known story, oft repeated, interesting story about it. One man prayed to God, if you please give me $1,000, I'm in need of that. So as you were walking, and if you give me $1,000, I should donate $500 to a nearby church, some charity. So as he was walking in the street, he found a wallet lying in the street, and then he found $500. So he said, "Oh God, you have taken your share already, so I can have the Lord with me." So frequently, our own mind may interpret the way we want. So without our effort, God's grace will be absolutely of no use. Because our effort removes the obstacles that stand in the way of our recognizing God's grace as God's grace. Our effort doesn't bring God's presence, but our own endeavor will remove the obstacles that stand in the way of our realizing God. And when those obstacles are removed, experience really happens. Of course, we cannot explain this more clearly than by quoting many stories, many illustrations and metaphors and allegories in the Saint Teresa of Avila's autobiographical writings and also in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And there are innumerable incidents in so many books. But one important point, one well-known story that quoted and referred to by a Christian mystic in the mid-19th century Russia is called the Way of a Pilgrim. A humble peasant who happened to listen to a sermon on the first episode on how to remain perpetually in a state of prayerfulness, Jesus' prayer. So he listened to a sermon by a clergyman in Russian Orthodox Church in the middle of 19th century. The story goes those times. And he listened to it and he wanted to know how to remain always in a state of prayerfulness without any effort on our part. So he went in search of somebody who could teach him that. And he found out a Orthodox monk who taught him this Jesus prayer, how to remain naturally, effortlessly in a state of prayerfulness. And he also talks about the role of his own efforts in getting his spiritual desire fulfilled. So the example is taken from Saint Teresa of Avila's autobiographical writings. She gives the example of a farmer who is trying to irrigate the field. So there is a pond, a river, maybe, but some other collection of water. From there, she wants to bring the water to the field. But before she actually does this irrigation, the field should be made ready. There's a huge collection of stones and pebbles and weeds and grass in the field. The field should be made ready before she brings water. Otherwise, you get only weeds and grass and not crop. But then the effort involved in bringing this water from the pond to the field is itself just a matter of removing the obstacles. When you cut a canal for half a mile, what you do is you remove the earth that covers the small part of the land, earth. You are not cutting a canal, you are only removing the unnecessary collection of soil in that route. When you want to build a statue of Buddha, and if you got a granite stone in front of you, a huge granite block, what you do, you chisel out a statue of Buddha, and you chisel out all unnecessary parts from the granite block. And the result is a Buddha. Similarly, our efforts, it may be prayer, it may be listening to lectures, it may be karma yoga. All these constitute different ways of chiseling out the unnecessary parts or removing the sand, the soil, the earth on the roots through which the water flows from the pond to the field. So without human effort, it is impossible. This has been put in a very graphic style by Holy Mother, Sri Sharadani. Once a few devotees came to her, so you can imagine the same spiritual phenomenon, spiritual truth, expressed in so many different languages, vocabularies, cultures, and traditions, because spirituality doesn't recognize borders of geographical lines of demarcation or cultural boundaries or anything. So a group of devotees once came to Holy Mother and they told her, since you have taken our entire responsibility, we can have a good time, no problem. We don't have to do any sadhana. We can go and sleep. So the mother, a spiritual teacher is like a physician, a doctor. The doctor doesn't give the same medicine to every patient. Many patients will die if a doctor ever gave the same prescription to every patient for every disease. So mother found, well, these people are lazy, won't do any spiritual sadhana, they have taken initiation, but won't do anything for them, for their own spiritual process, spiritual growth. So she scolded them. Even I'm doing japa and sadhana all the time. And you said everything comes on its own. You should make your own effort. So the importance of our own effort is very important. Sri Ramakrishna himself says, when the boat is anchored on this bank of the river, you have to, first of all, you have to untie the rope, free the boat from the bondage, then you should move to the midstream, then only you will be able to make use of the wind that is blowing. You can't make use of the wind if the boat is tied to the anchor. So you should get up from where you're sitting, untie the rope, row for some distance, reach the midstream, then you can make use of the breeze that is blowing. All these are different ways of human effort. Purusha prayerna, as we call it in Sanskrit. And what about God's grace? Mother says, in another context, a group of devotees came to Holy Mother. And they said, well, we are working hard for years, meditation, japa. In fact, in San Francisco, there is an organization which promises to lift your kundalini for $500. For an advanced course, $1,500. So much effort. And the result is, of course, psychiatrists they're getting richer and richer. That's all. Anyway, so in this case, a group of devotees went to Mother and they told her that we are working very hard, get up in the morning, we're meditating, practicing different forms of spiritual sadhana, still nothing is happening. Then Mother said, because you are doing all this, does it mean that God should appear before you? God is not like vegetable or fish in that context, local context, that you can go to market and buy for money. So this harmony of both human effort and also faith in God, these two should go together. This will help us to turn our mind into our own best friend. So the most dependable kit for spiritual journey is a friendly mind. And to create a friendly mind, we should try to, first of all, learn how to turn our mind from a hostile phenomenon to a friend. I mentioned this at the very beginning, a mind that creates obstacles either in the form of procrastination or self-deception, that mind is not our best friend. But then it's our own mind. The best way to do that is to turn our mind into our own best friend, is to give some good food to our mind. What's good food? Karma Yoga will help us to generate healthy samskaras, tendencies, vasanas. And again, dependence on God also will help us. And there is something very interesting about Karma Yoga. You know, in the classical Karma Yoga doctrine, in the Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, in fact, in the Buddhist canon, Pali canonical literature, the Tripitakas we call it. In these Tripitakas, which actually the result of a number of monks congregating in the first Buddhist council, about 40 years after Buddha's passing away, in what is now Rajagriha near Patna, in the state of Bihar, the first Buddhist council. All these ancient monks, Buddha's own disciples, they remembered the teachings of Buddha, which he mostly preached in Prakrit, but the script is Pali. And they remembered and they codified and they wrote these instructions in 3 important books called the Tripitakas. Pitaka means baskets, collections. In these Tripitakas, Buddha makes a very interesting point. In one of the dialogues with Ananda, Buddha refuses to accept or reject faith in God. But he insists on doing good things with a compassionate heart. And he also says that if you do good things, you will naturally be endowed with a compassionate heart, and your mind will be very compassionate towards you. So he talks about Karma Yoga. So one advantage, one unique feature of Karma Yoga is that Karma Yoga will help us to turn our mind into a best friend and thereby prepare a wonderful kit for spiritual journey, a wonderful, healthy, helpful mind, friendly mind. Karma Yoga, even without believing in God, even without believing in rituals or in philosophy, Karma Yoga can spiritually help us in our life, can help us in our spiritual journey. It's very interesting. Because what happens is, as I mentioned earlier, Karma Yoga is like a building block of the structure, the building. That's our spiritual life or destiny. If all the materials that you use are good, and this workmanship also included, then naturally you have a good building. Our life will become naturally elevated if we keep on doing good things in our life. That's one fundamental principle. Remember, this is not Buddhism alone, not only Yoga Sutra. Shankaracharya, the greatest Advaita, the original exponent of Advaita philosophy, he says in the Gita Bhashya, it's an important quotation, Karma Nishthayaha Chitta Suddhidvarena Purushadha Heduttam Na Swatantrena Jnana Nishtadu Swatantrena Purushartha Hetuku Anyan Apeksha. What it means is, if you go on doing unselfish activity, not just professional work, but whatever we do in our everyday life, if we can do from a spiritual perspective, give it a spiritual orientation, what happens is that karma becomes karma yoga. This anyone can just illustrate and find out. So any person who continuously does something without selfishness, with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, this might work in terms of my position in society, my fitness, my qualification, in terms of what I'm expected to do. This is my duty. And if you do with a sense of sanctity, sacredness, and unselfishness, what happens is that action itself becomes a royal highway to the highest spiritual enlightenment. Shankaracharya says that karma yoga is destined. It is guaranteed to give us mental purity. And once the mind is pure, then spiritual realization and liberation. This is what Shankaracharya says. Even Swami Vivekananda, for example, says, the world is a gymnasium for us to work out our karmas. A gymnasium is not a place where we live. It's a place we go every May. I don't go, of course, most of you may. Every day you may spend an hour there. But the purpose of going to gymnasium is not to stay, but to go beyond gymnasium. So this world, our professions, our duties, work, our obligations, all these are important. These are different ways of working out our own spiritual destiny. But there is something else in this context I want to emphasize. This is very important in modern times. Sometimes we interpret Karma Yoga as some kind of perfectionism. Do your best to the highest, perfectionism or efficiency as such. Even a Kantian concept of critical reason, It is, in a way, it may be responsible for Germany's development in engineering and BMW, all that may be true, but it doesn't have a spiritual content, a spiritual element in it. But in Karma Yoga, you not only become efficient, effective, responsible, but along with that, it also becomes a tool for a means for our own spiritual progress. That's not mentioned in the European or Western concept of perfectionism. This is a very important point. So, if we can look upon whatever we do as a means for our own spiritual progress, at the same time, we cannot forget or ignore the realities of life in this world. One should be efficient, one should be effective, and diligent. At the same time, we should remember that that kind of efficiency, though it is essential, that's not enough. This idea which you are talking to right now, it can be applied in everyday life and mind will become a best friend. In ancient India, there is this concept of Rajarshi. That word as such comes from the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Imam vivasude yogam proktavan ahamavayam vivaswan manave praha manu ikshakavya pravi evam parampara praptam imam Rajarshyo vidhu sakalena mahada yogo nashta parantava. This unique ideal of everyday life, how to practice spirituality in whatever we do in our everyday life, not only spiritual rituals, but also in secular activities. So this particular verse tells us that this concept of Rajarshi, it comes from ancient times. I first taught to Vivaswan to Manu, Ikshaku, a long lineage of great philosopher kings, like the philosopher kings mentioned in Plato's Republic. The Gita is first book that mentioned this philosopher king idea. What it says is, in ancient times, there used to be this lineage of great kings. They were kings in terms of their efficiency. They were ruling monarchs, but they were also sages, rishis. The point is, who is a king, who is a rishi? Now, this Gita had many commentaries, the greatest commentary and the one is responsible for the popularization of Gita is Shankaracharya's commentary. It was Shankaracharya who took Gita after this huge forest of Mahabharata, which has got more than 100,000 verses. Gita is only 700 verses. So Shankaracharya detached this tiny fragment from Mahabharata and wrote a commentary. Today we are reading it. Today, if a Hindu monk goes to Rome, give a present to Vatican and Pope, Gita is the one book that is given. That's the prominence of it. Because Shankaracharya wrote a commentary, so Gita became so universal. Now, one of the commentaries, Shankarananda Saraswati is a small tika. He says, Rajatvam Aishwarya Sambati Rishitvam Tasyaha Sukshmartha Dasana Kshamitam. A very great statement. I should explain this. What is the position of a king? A king is prosperous. He is prominent in secular life. He is rich, he is powerful. Like a modern CEO, let us say. We are talking about ancient scriptures. So we have to think of those times. A great king is an emperor, is like a CEO. He should be efficient. He should be, naturally, he be rich, ambitious, enthusiastic, all the quality, dynamic, and so on. But that's not enough. He should also have the mind of a seer, of a saint, a sage, a savant. Rishi is a person who can understand that money is important, but money is not enough. Power is important, but power is not enough. Wealth is important. It's necessary for people to live in this world. You cannot glorify poverty. In India, there was this problem. To be poor is great. So this misunderstood, misconceived definition or interpretation of spirituality as poverty, spirituality as backwardness, social backwardness. Swami Vivekananda comes heavily on some of these misconceptions which are prevalent in 19th century India. Anyway, that's a different part of the story. So what the commentators of the Gita tell you is this. You should have the farsightedness and the wisdom to understand that money is necessary, power may be necessary, but you should remember that's not enough to make your life complete and to make your life really successful. You should also know the limitation of wealth and power. Tasyaha sukshmartha dasana kshamartha. Means money, wealth, power, all this will come and go. That understanding, that wisdom is also necessary when you try to become wealthy. You can, the well-known concept that you find in many important political leaders, you should give power to the one who doesn't want power. You should give money to the one who doesn't want money. So the idea that life should be, our paradigm of life should be a harmony of the best of secular, the best of the spiritual. Just as it is wrong for a monk to accumulate wealth, so also it is wrong for an householder to glorify poverty. Our smritis are full of statements. A grihastha, an householder, who thinks that money is not needed, is like Hazra, who was, not Hazra, but the other one who came to Dakshineshwar, who sat like pretending to be, who had neglected his duty, Pratap Chandra Hazra. He had his family, responsibilities, obligations. He gave up everything and pretending to be a great ascetic. And Sri Ramakrishna throw him away. You go to your home, take care of your parents, take care of children. So the idea is a harmonious blending of the best of the secular and the best of the spiritual. That should be an important idea. Because frequently in modern times, people are often facing this conflict. Is it proper to be spiritual and also to run a business? People frequently ask me this question, mostly in the Bay Area, because every day they start a new startup. So they ask you, is it wrong or is it right to go for money? As if spirituality means you live in a forest, don't care for professional efficiency or anything. And they cannot do that because they cannot survive in modern times. If you leave their job, if you glorify poverty, you cannot live. So frequently they do, because they mostly go to temples. Bay Area is full of temples, but nobody is interested in philosophy. So they often ask this question, is it proper to start a business? You have to do it, because spiritual tradition for society, especially for society, was preserved and interpreted by kings and not by ascetics in ancient times. That's what Lord Krishna is proclaiming in the Gita, in the in the 4th chapter, 1st and 2nd verse. So our conflicts can be resolved only by a proper understanding of our real spiritual path. That is a harmony, a friction-free blending of the best of the secular and the best of the spiritual. That is very much needed. If you do that, what happens is every action, every thought, every word can be given a spiritual orientation. This is what our scriptures tell you. And then there is another very important thing to be kept in mind. Very often we have problems. One of the Yoga Sutras tell you that if you can worry about something noble, if you can sublimate your worry, then that will lead us to fulfillment. To give an example, so Buddha's example is given by many scholars. Buddha was born as a prince, lived in a palace, luxurious place, but he had his 3 visions. He saw a dead body being taken to the cremation ground, and he also saw a sick man sitting in a corner, street corner, and he also saw an old man. So the old age, sickness, and death, 3 dark realities of life that opened his eyes. And then he wanted to find an answer for this, and he left his place and he became Buddha. So if we can worry about others, any kind of service activity, especially after retirement or along with job, we should have one kind of activity, one separate channel for doing something good for some noble cause. It may be helping this Vedanta center. It may be helping in any spiritual place or spiritual cause for the matter. Because we can create a channel to direct our energy, which is not related to any kind of our obligation, duty, or job or anything. And we should be sure that we won't get any material benefit from it. Any unselfish activity, any kind of noble activity, or any help or participation for a higher cause will have a healing effect on our mind, and we'll be happy about it. This is it's an important psychological principle. This can even be found many billionaires, after piling up so much of money, they later start a trust or foundation to do some unselfish activity somewhere, because they want to get a little more sleep. All the money they have piled up, big job, have not helped them to experience that fulfillment within, the inner sense of fulfillment. Something is still wanting deep in our heart. So they're forced to do some charity. So like that, this is just a very interesting manifestation of this need for going beyond our immediate selfish obligations and duties. Along with whatever we do as part of our duty and responsibility, official duty, whatever it is, doing something good for a higher cause. What happens is slowly our mind will start experiencing a kind of inner fulfillment, inner joy. I'm doing something sensible. That feeling comes. And this is another way of creating, of generating spiritual energy. At the beginning, we may feel the conflict, but when we start spiritual life, we feel that there is a secondary personality emerging. The one who enjoys meditation, the other, the previous personality, which did not enjoy meditation, did not want to meditate. You can see this. When we begin our spiritual life, we'll be facing this conflict. Small, tiny part of our mind begins to enjoy when we relate spiritual practices. But it's a new beginning. The early part of the mind did not have this experience. So there is this conflict. I mean, what we want to do and what our mind permits us to do. As we continue our spiritual efforts, slowly our mind will become more and more friendly. So I'm just trying to give a brief outline of some of the ideas that came to my mind. I think a subject like this can be more effectively discussed in a Q&A session than in just one-way talk. This is more interesting, more helpful. Okay, thank you. Namaskar. You're welcome to ask questions.
Swami, I have to ask. I have been having this question in my mind for some time now. So, Vivekananda Swamiji said that there's a potential divinity in each soul, and this comes from Vedanta itself. And accordingly, most devotees try to see God in every being, human being, animal. But sometimes some incidences happen, very cruel incidences. And for example, the recent incident that happened in Calcutta in the Arjikar hospital, we start to question, how can God be in such a human being? That kind. So what do we have in our spiritual toolkit that can help us resolve this when we are closing our eyes and meditating, or when you are opening our eyes and going about doing our business?
Now, of course, there are two ways of approaching this subject. One way to approach the subject is a playing demagoguery, evil, inefficiency, incompetence. It is criminal inefficiency, criminal, lack of work ethic. All these are real reasons that should be dealt with by law or people's direct intervention, because such crimes do not really belong to the realm of spirituality. It's a very important point. Sometimes when people cannot directly react, when they seriously do anyone may ask this question: if God is there, why should there be a Hitler? One may ask this question. Why should there be all these terrible things happening? You see, those subjects actually, of course, spirituality can be a perspective, but in the particular situation that you refer to, it is just an example of criminal inefficiency, lack of people's competence. So there are situations where people have to really react with all vigor and efficiency. Lord Krishna would not have tolerated such a situation. Whatever Vivekananda said was only trying to echo the views of Sri Krishna. I think what Lord Krishna asked Arjuna to do when there were criminals in front of him, he did not ask Arjuna to practice ahimsa or practice spirituality. Remember. So spirituality becomes spirituality even when an action is necessary to solve a problem in society or in social situation. That is true. In this question arises frequently from the conundrum, this paradox. If God is there present everywhere, why should there be problems in this world? It's a metaphysical question, really speaking, not a question from spiritual perspective. So that's why I mentioned it should be approached from two angles. From pure spiritual perspective, I can only give the answer on the basis of Lord Krishna's Bhagavad Gita. And Vivekananda would have completely followed Lord Krishna's footsteps in this matter. Remember. So that is one into that. I think the answer is very obvious. That's one thing. And then, of course, there is always evil in this world. Just that there is divinity in all of us. Unfortunately, there is a tendency, a natural, spontaneous tendency towards evil. That's also human psyche. From a Vedantic and yogic perspective, it is because of samskaras coming from previous life cycles. So you can, if you talk about yoga and spirituality, you can only think in terms of your own spiritual sadhana. Okay. So in your spiritual sadhana, for example, when you feel the conflict between doing something you have to do which is your duty, and then a tendency to be indifferent or maybe a doubt. Well, is it proper for me to do? When you are an householder, Swamiji says it is your duty to do that. I intended this quotation may not be relevant in America's context, though we are speaking the United States, but India's context is very important. Swamiji says the day when householders started practicing ahimsa and tyaga, meant for sannyasis and yogis, India's fate was sealed. Swamiji talks about India, but this can be properly understood only in the light of Indian history. You can understand it, but not. So I'm just skipping that subject altogether. So I can answer your question even from the standpoint of what is now happening in different parts of the world, but they will be going beyond the scope of our discussion. The very question you asked can also be asked by many people in different parts of the world. It's happening everywhere, but that will take us beyond the scope of our discussion. So let us stick to our topic right now. Okay? Any question on what I discussed just now, please?
More of a general question on religion. I think Sri Ramakrishna has the potential to give us religion. Religion, as per Swamiji, is realization.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the mind having tendencies. Is it possible sometimes when these samskaras start boiling up, is it possible for it it's kind of a sheath of wrong knowledge? Like, let's say you're progressing in your spiritual journey and you're getting all these blessings, but then all of a sudden you come to a dead stop and you feel like your mind has downshifted somehow, like you are not in that higher substratum. Why can't we continue on our journey? Why doesn't it stick? Why do we lose that? And I'm not somebody who believes that I need to feel some kind of spiritual fervor or something for me to have the conviction, but I feel like we lose it, we gain. It's just a lot of ups and downs.
So the coming to the topic you raised at the very beginning, even Swamiji was not at first ready for Advaita Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna, I tell you, you can imagine Swami Vivekananda's progression from the time when he first met Sri Ramakrishna and to the moment when Sri Ramakrishna passed away. At first, Swamiji actually mocked Sri Ramakrishna, made fun of Sri Ramakrishna. You say, this is Brahman, that is Brahman, everything is Brahman. You see. It was at that moment that Sri Ramakrishna touched him. And then also Swamiji had a vision, a mystical experience, which again did not remain for too long. Even after that experience, Swami Vivekananda expressed his not lack of faith, but his skeptical ideas because of the difficulties he had to undergo. He had to struggle. He was struggling to get a job even on one occasion. He could get a job. So what I mean to say, even if you get a little vision at that time, it will not remain there all the time. So after giving this mystical experience, Sri Ramakrishna told Swamiji, at that time Narendra, that I will keep this under lock and key. I will reopen only later. And Sri Ramakrishna reopened only later when Swamiji went to the room and prayed and meditated for 3 hours. That day Swamiji passed away. That is 1902, July 4th. Till that moment, it was locked it was kept under lock and key in a box, so to speak. Because if Swami Vivekananda had lived in that Advaitic mood, that mystical mood, He would not have bothered to come to Parliament of Religion, founding Ramakrishna Mission, and then preaching Sri Ramakrishna's message all over the world. Swamiji would not have done it. So, and coming back to an ordinary spiritual seeker's life, spiritual life is not like a continuous, unbroken succession. When you take your first step in spiritual life, you feel a great joy, a great sense of fulfillment. So from 1 to, let's say, think of a ladder with 10 steps, 10 stages. From first to second is a long distance. From second to fourth, it is slightly lower. From 4 to 10, it is quicker. I can tell you an example. Anyone who begins his or her spiritual life will, at the beginning of the spiritual life, will feel a lot of excitement, fulfillment, joy. Slowly that joy seems to decrease. It's not because you don't progress in spiritual life, but you don't feel the intensity of the progress you are making. That's why from 0 to 1, 0 to 2, you may feel that dramatic transition you may feel. From second or third to 8, you don't feel so much of intensity, but still you are making progress. So this is an important point to keep in mind. People mostly feel disappointment and depression. I'm not getting anything. That when I first started spiritual life, a lot of inner fulfillment and joy. Now I don't feel it. That's because at the beginning, you're just beginning the journey. The transition is so dramatic. You feel an overwhelming sense of joy and fulfillment. But that intensity of experience decreases as you make more and more progress. Because, as I mentioned earlier, a child who learns alphabet in a kindergarten, suddenly his eyes open vividly, wonder, new knowledge coming. But that child, when he becomes a professor, when he reads a new book, he may not feel the same intensity. Or when he progresses from his city college to university, for example, or when he progresses from his 5th grade to 10th grade, 12th grade, you won't feel that intensity. But the kindergarten, when he learned that alphabet, A, a new world is opening in front of him. So the intensity of progression will not be felt, not because it is absent, because our mind gets more and more evolved. Very often, but remember, in spiritual life, our mind also begins to change and evolve. So it feels less and less of the intensity, though it's making rapid progress. Yes, sir? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Swamiji, could you talk a little bit about the correlation between an individual's personal dharma and spiritual life in terms of Arjuna and Krishna?
Yeah. You want me to speak on in the context of Bhagavad Gita? Okay. Now, I tell you, come to Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna speaks the language of a hypocrite. And also in Uddhava, first chapter. Arjuna was armed to the teeth like a special forces soldier. He come to the battlefield. And he knew what he was supposed to do. In front of him, there were evil men, Duryodhana, Dushasana. They had done every conceivable kind of crimes. And Arjuna was there. And also they had taken away their wealth, everything. There's a verse that is Agnido Girdasaiva Shastravani Dhanabhaka Kshetradara Apakartacha Shadedihi Atatainaka. So actually, this is a definition of a criminal in Yajnavalkya Smriti. What it means is the one who sets fire to other people's homes and the one who poisons another person. Shastravani means the who chases you with arms, Dhanaha taking away all your wealth. Kshetradara Apakartacha, who steals your wife and paddy, your field. Such criminals should be killed without a second thought. So, Atadai Vatharhanaga, like that, there are many statements. I'm going to that. Now, who was facing Arjuna? Many of them were Dushasana, others were done every conceivable kind of criminal activities. Now, you can imagine suppose security guard is standing in front of a school to protect the children and the teachers and the poor people from the terrorists, evil men. And he has an AK-47, he can advance or sort of rifles. If he thought, oh, I should not do any harm to anyone, the terrorists also human beings. Then do you support him? You cannot. That was Arjuna was doing. Na kamshe vijayam Krishna, na cha rajyam sukhani cha, kim no rajyena govinda, kim bhoge jivitenava. In the first chapter, what's the use of all this wealth, money and everything? Why should I fight? What's the use of, David Chamberlain and Hitler, there was a pact, in 1939-38, that just before Hitler attacked Poland and Czechoslovakia, Chamberlain thought we have won, there will be no war in our generation. And that is what actually caused Second World War. Britain, instead of standing up to Hitler, British government, David Chamberlain, he tried to appease Hitler. And Hitler got emboldened and Hitler attacked Poland and Czechoslovakia. They Stalin, Hitler pact, Molotov, Ribbentrop treaties, and in the world, European history. What I mean to say, anyone who is expected by society to oppose adharma, if he doesn't do it, because he thinks he's practicing himsa or violence, he's actually practicing himsa. So himsa, to avoid himsa is ahimsa. Remember? I hope you understand. Gandhi, with the prophet of ahimsa, was going all over India, inspiring Indians, the martial races of India, Jats, Rajputs, Gurkhas, to join British war effort. 2.9 million Indians fought in Second World War. Gandhi was the one who inspired them to join British war effort. Same Gandhi was a prophet of ahimsa. So the point is, we have often this wrong notion. That's why a lot of these points can be clear, a lot of wrong notion. So this part, not part of Vedanta, but Vedanta cannot be separate from anything. History also should be part of Vedanta. But I mean to say, an action that you're supposed to do, by definition of your duty, fitness, responsibility, and expectations from society. You're a doctor, society expects you to treat patients. That's what you Swadharma. That is your own Swadharma. That is your way to moksha. Suppose I'm a doctor, I don't want to do that. I would rather be a musician, a bad musician. I cannot attain moksha by music. So every person has his own Swadharma. So dharma can include dharma and swabhava. Your own natural instinct, responsibilities, duties, by definition of your training, and also what society expects from you. That is your Swadharma. And Arjuna's Swadharma as a soldier was to protect the innocent people from evil men. Arjuna thought by meditating, by becoming a monk, he can become an over a Brahman, he can get liberation. Krishna said no. So spirituality is a much broader question. So Swadharma means the duty that you consider as your duty, the duty that society expects from you, and the duty that you are expected to do by definition of your own training, your own professional fitness. That is your Swadharma. And that becomes our own, like our own private car to take us to spiritual goal.